Alright, so up until now we've managed to create a small account model with an email, first name, last name field. We've managed to take a middleware and transform it into a simple to-do logger. We had our account actions for register, login, and log out. Now, what we want to do is actually view all this in a application, a visual application. So I'm going to use the render plugin so that we can actually render some kind of HTML. So let's say npm I Thorin plugin render, and the render plugin actually uses the Nunjux templating engine, so I'm just going to install that also. Okay, and going here in our application, in our to-do file, we're just going to go on and just add plugin, require Thorin plugin render, wait for it to, okay, got installed, node to do, let's see if it works. Yes, it works. Now the render plugin is going to work with the views, so it's going to be our view layer, right? So in order to have a view layer, you have to have a folder that can hold up the views. So we're just going to call it views and place it inside app/views, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new swig file called login.swig, and I had a previously prepared to do static app. I'm just going to fetch some swig output from here, place it here. Just going to have, this is a small HTML. We're just going to have to just include I'm just going to come back to this. Public /js /main.js, and right here. This it should have been a React application, but we're just going to use it as a normal server-side rendered app. So we're just going to go login page. So this is our actual login page, and go ahead in our actions. In let's say home.js, we had a previous action called home.landing. Now we can just add a separate one, action home.login, and let's say that we're going to alias it to get slash, and just turn this one into actually just get /login, and say we're going to use login.swig. Now, what the actual render plugin does is it also extends a couple of things, but it mainly extends the action, the Thorin action, with a function called render. Now, the render function, instead of sending the actual JSON to the client by the transport layer, is going to send the generated HTML string that was returned by the Nunjux templating engine. So you have Nunjux, you have some swig files here that are parsed by Nunjux, and then you have some actions here that want to render out those templates, and the result will be sent out back to the client. So let's see this in action right here. We're going to go back here to localhost 3000 /login. So you're going to see here a login page. The app just rendered out a simple login.swig here, and if we look inside the console, we're going to see here that we have some missing resources. Now, if we look a bit inside the folder structure of our application, now it has a session folder, a app folder, a configuration folder, and it also has a public folder. Now, By default, the HTTP transport does serve static content if it finds a public folder in your root application. So everything that is beneath this folder here is accessible if you just fetch it from the URL. So I'm just going to go on and create a folder here called JS and just move this fetcher here. Remember that I told you at the beginning that we have a couple of helper clients, helper JavaScript clients. One of them is the fetcher library, which essentially uses the fetch-like syntax to dispatch post requests to our backend with a type and payload kind of matching. So just for ease of use, we're just going to use script. We're just going to use our fetcher here, just in a normal, like, global scoped. Thorin is mainly for backend, so don't hate on me because I'm using this on the front end. Just API equals fetcher API and localhost 3000 / dispatch. Now, if we're going to console log this API, we're going to see that it's an actual instance. Fetch. Let's see here. Fetcher. Okay, public. Okay, sorry. Like this. Something seems to be JS/fetcher. Yes, sorry about that. We have this invalid arguments. Let's just say called like URL this, and then we have a fetcher, a do fetch function that is called with an action and then a payload. Now we have our, well, in a normal application you would use this fetcher inside a React app or any kind of, I don't know, structure that you have in your front end. Again, this is a back end example, not a front end. So we're seeing here this asset function here. This essentially returns the public accessible URL of the given file. So as I said, everything that's beneath public is accessible as public. And this asset simply just fetches localhost 3000 and then just appends this CSS/styles.css. Now in a real world application, your front end app would be hosted on some kind of CDN or, I don't know, static server. You can define where is that static server in your actual configuration here. So I'm going to say just CDN. This is a setting called CDN, and this is going to be used by the render layer to link the static files and include them. So I'm just going to use the localhost as a CDN. CDN. And if we're going to go inspect our single page application, we're going to see that it actually includes this ref, and also includes a version. So if you're using something like Cloudflare or any kind of CDN services, you can just do version caching on the query stream as well. Okay, so we're just rendering a login page, and let's just enter right here. Let's just enter an input form. My form, input type text, name, email. That's it. ID equals email. Input type, we got passwords, name, password, pass. Button type, submit. Login. So just for ease of use, I am going to add jQuery in the equation. We're probably not going to need it, but just to make everything work easily, I'm just going to insert it in right here. So I'm just going to include it in my app, js/jquery.main.js. Now we have jQuery and my form.submit. Or payload equals, and then we have username, which is email. Actually, we are using emails, right? So we have email, val,
Hashtags. Hashtag before email and this is my phone.
hashtag, and then we have password, hashtag password, val. So we're sending
My phone too. Hashtag.
payload. Sorry?
Hashtag my phone.
Yes, hashtag my phone. Okay. So we have this, and we're needing why is it still submitting? On submit. Seriously. Is anything
Return false.
yes, sorry. It's been a while since I've worked with jQuery. It's still returning, it's still submitting. Let's go back and submit. Sorry about this. And form method. Of course, because document.ready. Document is not ready. Finally, alright, so we have the payload, and we're missing the password. ID equal pass. Alright, so now we have the payload, and we need to send out a request to our backend. Now, in this example, our backend is the same as our API is the same as the app that hosts the actual view layer. So the account.login action right here is available for us on the same localhost 3000. And let's just go with the API call this action with this payload. And then let's see what it will return. Alright, let's see here. Console. Yes. Now, one we send out invalid or missing identity. That means that our email is not valid. So we have test@test.com, test123. Passwords must be at least 8 characters. Yes, test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Alright. Now, the reason you saw that the first argument here is because the password policy. So our AltTH plugin checks the password policy, and before it does anything, it checks whether you have a valid password or not. So whether it's 8 characters or less. If it's 8 characters or less and you have at least 8 characters, it's just going to stop the request right there. Now that we sent a valid password, it's going to go on, and if we look into the console, it's going to actually check and do the query, and of course that test account does not exist, so it's going to stop right there. So let's go here and see what kind of account did we have. Actually, let's just create one from Postman. Let's create a test account. Test@test.com with password test12345 Alright, so the account was created, and let's use this account to log in. Test12345 Now, this is it's undefined here, but if you look into the network, we see that the fetcher actually does a post request /dispatch, It's exactly the same thing that we did with Postman. And if we look into the request payload, we have the type, which is the account.login, and the payload is the actual form data. If we look inside the response, we didn't actually set any kind of result in our action. We just kind of like next. Let's just say intent object dot result account. Let's just place the account as a result, and because we are in a testing environment, let's just remove this middleware where it checks that we're logged in or not. So just comment it out, restart, refresh, and then we have test@test.com, test. The request is made, and we're going to see here in the response that we have a little result, right? So that result is going to be parsed by the fetcher client helper library, and we have access to the actual account JSON. So if we're looking inside the resources tab, the cookies, we're going to see here in localhost we have TPS. So this TPS is our account, right? Is our session, sorry, it's our session that contains our account. Now let's go on here back to a project where we are actually rendering login.swig, right? So here we say that whenever somebody goes to /login, you just render this template. And let's do this. Dot use. Let's check whether if the account is logged in or not. So if intent object dot session account, if the user is logged in, the intent object, the HTTP transport actually extends to the default intent, adding a function called redirect. So we can just redirect the user to /account, for example. Otherwise, we just continue as normal. So let's see what happens. We remember that we already have a session, and if we refresh, the middleware said, okay, yeah, we have a session, and the user is logged in, so just redirect him to /account. Now, there's no action that's going to handle the account /account alias. That's why we're getting the transport layer error that there's nothing to go with /account. So let's go on here and in home, let's add a action that's called account.home or home.account. Let's go with home.account. Home.account and alias get /login. Dot use intent object next. And now because let's just render account.swig. Because we only want registered users to go inside the account, we got to check if we have a session or not. So I'm just going to copy this. If we don't have an account on the session, we redirect to /login. Otherwise, proceed as normally. So if we restart, we're going to get an error that this view is not found. The alias here, sorry, it should be account. So whenever I hit /account, I'm going to receive an error, failed to render page, and the console will say everything about the error. So again, this kind of error, this kind of stack trace, is never going to reach the client because it doesn't have to. It shouldn't. It should never do that. All right. So let's go back here. In our views folder, which is here, we are just going to add, just copy paste this and call it account. And here, we're just going to say welcome, and we are going to access information about the current account that's logged in. So the way we do that, let's just remove the script. The way we do that is because we're inside a templating engine that is on the server side, we have access to the intent. So whenever we say, okay, nunjugs, I need you to render this file using these local variables. So Thorin with the render plugin, sends out by default some local variables that are accessible within the template. So here, whenever I'm going to /account, and whenever I'm going to render the account.swig, I will always have access to the session inside here. So I can just say this: intent.session.account.firstname, and this is pretty much it. We have welcome John. Because because the intent was the single object that contains all the information about the request, all the result, the input, the client headers, and all that, we're just going to send this intent to the render engine, and you can access it dynamically by calling intent.session.account.firstname. We can also set stuff like intent object.result, my result, let's call it the title, and my title. So right before trying to render out the actual template, I'm just going to place the result inside my intent. And what I can do right here, H4 for example, intent.result title. Right? So I'm going to fetch the key called title from my intent's result. So you notice that this result function is actually both a setter and a getter. So in my action, I set a key in my result. The key is the title, the value is my title. And in my view, I got a key from the result, right? So pretty straightforward. If you want, you can just really dump intent. There's a function called dump in nunjugs, where you can see the all the information about the intent, all the publicly accessible information. So we have whether or not it's completed, if it was a proxy, we can get into this later on. The current action that we're in, and the transport that was used to actually complete this request. Now, I'm going to call .input so that I can dump all my input data. Now, notice that I have no input data. So let's go back here and go with the, let's add some kind of input data, right? Because let's say that I want to display some kind of information based on the information somebody provides. So as before, I'm going to call the input function and say text. I need somebody to provide me a text with that. This should be on, let's say, validate, let's say it's going to be an IP. And if it's not going to be provided, just use this default value. Alright? So let's see what happens when we do this. Alright, this is my input. The text is the default value because when the intent was created, no input data, input source had any kind of text inside, nor the query string, nor the parameters, URL parameters, nor the body. So it took the default value. If it weren't any kind of default value, it would just return an error saying that, hey, you need to enter the text. Now I'm just going to go inside the URL. I'm not sure if it's visible. I'm just going to add text equals 2222. And
it's a get.
It's a text. Alright, so the URL here is account question mark text equals 2222. Now because this is a valid IP address, the query string from this, I'm just going to copy this and place it in a text pad so you can see it. So this request is the actual request that you were seeing in the browser. So that means that this is a query string of the request, and it is treated as a input source by the HTTP transport. So it knows that in my action, I'm asking for a text as an input, and it found the text inside the URL. So it's going to use it. It's a valid IP address. It's going to use it. It's going to place it inside the input object. If I'm going to change from 2222, which is a valid IP, to let's say 222 and 300, it's not going to fetch it. This is the actual URL that I was using. It's not going to fetch it because this is not a valid IP address. Even though it looks like one, it's not valid. Let's play a bit with this. So I want to, as I said here, that I want to validate an IP, and let's make that IP only public true. So let's say that I need an IP, public true. I only need you to validate public IP addresses, and I don't want you to take in consideration any kind of private IPs, right? So the default value is still this one. What happens if I enter 6666? It's a public IP. What happens if I enter, let's say 162.22.122? It's still 127.0.0.1 because this IP that I used here, this one, is a private IP, right? So if you really want to look into it, there's this sanitizer module, and these are all the items that you can use, and we were just going to look inside the IP sanitizer. As you can see, it uses the range check module, and it's just going to check if the given string is a valid IP or not. And now these are the options. You can say, okay, I want this IP to match a range of IPs, which can be a CIDR string, CIDR range or individual IP addresses. It can be a private or a public IP. So this will actually just look and check whether or not the IP matches the input validations that I just provided here in my example. So I said these are the options that I passed to my validator. Just remove this, restart the project, and the IP 172 is going to be a valid IP address because I lifted the restriction that my IP should be private, or should be public, sorry. So this is the actual, like a small example of how to use the sanitization, validation, and the rendering engine. Now let's go ahead and go on and finally add our to-do model. I'm just going to copy the account one and say, okay, my to-do, I need my to-do to have an email, a name, a text, and is done, right? Alright. And I'm going to say my model belongs to an account, because one account can have many to-dos. So I add a new model. That means I have to reset the database so that the table can actually be created. So I'm just set invalid field. Sorry, this is not bool, this is boolean. Again, these are SQLized specific types. So if you want to look more into them, you can just go to SQLized, their main documentation page. So we can see here that the script actually reset the database. If I'm going to go back to the account, there is no account. If I'm going to refresh here, we have this to-do table, which contains all our information, and the account ID, which is an actual foreign key to the account table. So now that we have the to-do, let's just start in normal mode. Now that we have a to-do table, we're going to have an account. We're still going to have a session, but remember that on the session we have a JSON, and we didn't have the actual object. So what we can do to prevent this kind of things, we can go back here in our example, and go on and add a middleware called, let's say, session check. Right? So I'm just going to go and just copy this bit, use it here, session. I'm just going to add a authorization called session.account, which simply just use checks whether or not the user is logged in and that account is still available. Right, so I'm just going to use my if intent object dot session dot account. If we don't have an account at all on the session, Thorin dot error. Actually, we're just going to try to redirect to /login if we don't have any kind of session. Then, if we still do have a session, we're just going to check whether or not that account actually exists. So the way we do this, we just fetch our account reference, account, and then just account.find where ID in intent object session account.id. And this is what we're going to receive, and in the catch, just pass out the next function here. Now, if we don't have an account, we again try to redirect to the login page. If we do have an account, just place that account inside the intent using data. Just continue as normal, right?
Rename the file.
And what?
Rename the whole file. You have two S's.
Where is
The file name.
the file name? Says essence, okay. Yes, I'm just going to name it. Dispatcher.store, sorry, this is Thorin.store, not dispatcher. Alright. Okay, so we have, I'm just going to hit refresh here, and it doesn't do anything because we just wrote our authorization, but we're not actually using it anywhere. So we have defined it here, but we need to make the account, sorry, in the home action, we need, when we're rendering /account, we need to tell it, okay, you have to use this authorization. Session account. So only authorized, authenticated users should be able to access this. I'm going to refresh, and it's going to redirect me to the login page. And the login page, what does the login page do? Why is it /login? Yes, so we had this thing here. The next thing we have to do here in our session check middleware is we just redirect it here to /login, but the session actually exists on the user side, so we have to actually reset the session. Session.destroy. So first destroy the session, and then redirect to /account, /login, sorry. So going back here to /account, it will just, it removed our session because the user was removed from the database, so essentially we should have destroyed the session at the beginning. So now we're just going to try and, well, actually we don't have any kind of login, so let's just go here and quickly create our, let's call this login form, just add a new create user form. Just copy this, and we have an email, a password, and I think we had a first name and a last name, right? First name, last name. Just make this quick first. So we have a first name, a last name, and right here in our document.ready, we have our form. Just call it register form. When it's submitted, just do this. Essentially, just copy everything, just move it out. We had the new first name and last name. And our endpoint is now account.register and now login. And once we created the account, just do a window location called /account string, and do this here again when logging so now I can actually, let's move this login page here in the form, it's here, and another one here called register page. So now we have login. Excuse the ugliness of all this, but it's the purpose. So we have first one is email, so we have test@test.com, test 1 2 3 4 5 6, test user. I'm going to register. We're going to send out, let's have it here, register form, submit, invalid value for email. Alright, so that means that, oh yes, we have 2 IDs, so that's bad. Don't go with 2 IDs. So we have our register, our email, and our pass. Just use test.com, test 1 2 3, test user. Login is going to create an account. It tried to redirect us, but it didn't work. Why is that? In our account we have all this, but in our session check, what do we do here?
Reject all session.
Session account. Let's try and go to /account. Doesn't need to let us. Let's see what kind of, okay, let's just try and reset it and test2 and test.com, test user 2. And before we submit, let's check here what happened in account.register. Yes, we did not create the actual session. So in this right here, we result, instead of resulting, we can just place session.account equals account object dot to JSON. So instead of just returning the account, just place it on the session and the client will just redirect. So now that we're going to create, it's going to create a session, redirect it to /account, and if we go back to /login, we already have a session. It's going to redirect us back to account.